Hi, I'm Scott Fee. Welcome to CHEK Spotlight, a special feature of the Rising Economy 2024 conference, which CHEK is pleased to sponsor from March 6th to 8th in Victoria. Dubbed the Business Conference for Business Insiders, Rising Economy is about shaping our businesses and organizations to succeed in the new economy. You can find out more at risingeconomy.com. Today on CHEK Spotlight, we're featuring an eye-opening discussion with artificial intelligence expert Handol Kim, CEO of Variational AI, in conversation with Ben Wagg, South Island Prosperity Partnership. Now, a couple of years ago, few people really understood how much impact AI would have on our lives, our work, our businesses. But Handol Kim did because, in fact, his company was already applying state-of-the-art AI to redefine the discovery of new drugs, starting with treatments for cancer. We'll follow up with Handol today to unpack this new AI. Over to you, Ben.
Welcome to the CHEK Spotlight for Rising Economy 2024, the business conference for business insiders. Today, we're sitting down with Variational AI CEO Handol Kim to talk about something everyone wants to know about, generative AI and how it's affecting our society and businesses. Handol is the co-founder and CEO of Variational AI, a drug discovery platform powered by generative AI. He's a 3-time founder CEO and has 25 plus years of leadership experience in AI, machine learning, quantum computing, and more at venture-backed startups in the Silicon Valley, Asia Pacific, and Canada. Welcome, Handol.
Thanks, Ben.
Great. So to start it off, you spoke at the previous Rising Economy conference on AI in a keynote called Freeing the Genie or Summoning the Demon. Is the world ready for generative artificial intelligence? Today, now that the genie has been freed, we're going to explore how your thinking has changed or stayed the same and the impact of AI across society and business. So to start it off, we were wondering, what is your company Variational AI all about, and what's the story behind it?
Well, Ben, Variational AI leverages generative AI for the discovery of small molecule drugs, primarily in the areas of cancer and immunology. But what we do is we've trained a very large and powerful model known as a foundation model, very similar to ChatGPT for text or Stable Diffusion for images, or AlphaFold for protein, large language models. And what we've done is we've done this for small molecule drugs, and we're making this available to biotechs and pharma customers to use to help redefine the unit economics of drug discovery.
Oh, cool. That's really interesting. So how exactly does Variational AI use artificial intelligence for its business? So you have some models, and then from there...
Yeah, we're what we would consider an AI first company, in the sense that we are AI for X, right? And there are a lot of companies that are AI first and then looking for an application that makes, both commercial and societal impact. So in our case, we're AI for drug discovery. And the reason why we chose drug discovery is because we've done quite a bit of research on this. We released academic results and research results that were state of the art when we started the company. But largely, the main problem is that it takes a long time and it's very high risk to come up with drugs. People may not know, but the average drug costs anywhere between $2.6 billion or more on a capitalized basis to come up with an approved drug. And many of these drugs, when they get approved, they don't actually make the money back because the R&D cost and the risk is extraordinarily high. It takes about 10, 12 years to go from start to approval, and the rate of attrition is extraordinarily high. So most drugs that go into clinical trials, that means they've been developed, they've been tested against animals and various other models. When they go into human trials in the space of oncology, for example, only 3% of the drugs actually get approved. That means that most fail in phase 2 or in phase 1 or in phase 3. The problem is you've spent a whole bunch of money until up until the stage where it works or it doesn't. What we're trying to do is redefine the unit economics of discovery, such that we can take that preclinical phase, which is about 4 to 6 years and hundreds of millions of dollars, and change that and reduce it to less than a year, and to do it with far more efficiently. And that's really the goal of the company. And we see a very, very big need to help make pharmaceuticals and therapeutics far more affordable, to de-risk, such that companies can actually spend money efficiently and come up with these new therapeutics, and also make these diseases that are unmet within the realm of commercial viability. Because if it's very, very high risk and very, very high cost, then people are not going to develop therapeutics for it. So we feel that this is a real democratization of therapeutics for underserved and unmet medical needs.
Mhm. Wow, that sounds really interesting. So you recently made an announcement around something called Anki, and we're kind of wondering what that is and what you can tell us about it.
Yeah, Anki is the name of our foundation model, just like ChatGPT or Llama 2 or or Stable Diffusion. Anki is our variational autoencoder based. It's a generative model, but there's a series of generative models that we put into it, and it is a platform. And so, very simply, what we do is in drug discovery. It's kind of like if you're a graphic designer, you need to make an image, you can use your Adobe, Illustrator or Photoshop or what have you, and then designers use these tools in order to create these assets, right? Well, chemists in drug discovery companies and small molecule drug discovery companies, they use a bunch of these tools as well from large companies like Schrodinger or OpenEye, et cetera. And they use these tools in order to generate these drugs, right? The only difference is that, maybe a marketing poster or some kind of campaign in graphic design is used for internal use, and you do a lot of these things. In drugs, really, you're trying to come up with a billion-dollar molecule. You're trying to come up with a blockbuster drug. So really what we're doing is we're very similar to a Stable Diffusion or a Midjourney, where essentially you don't need to be able to design everything at first. You just tell the model what you want, and then it creates that image. And in many cases, the images are stunning and they're very good, and obviously subject to a bit more further, sort of editing and improvement by humans. But we do that really, but for molecules and for drug-like molecules. And the idea is for us to be a tool to be used by chemists in order to vastly accelerate, the ideation, the triaging, and the optimization of these drug-like molecules. So it's very simple. They tell us the chemists tell us what they want, we make it, and then they move on from there.
Wow, cool. That sounds really useful. So we're kind of wondering as well, with AI changing so much since 2022, with the explosion of programs like Midjourney and ChatGPT and more becoming super popular, we're wondering how your thinking has changed around it, or if it's still similar to what it was back in 2022.
I mean, practically speaking, it's made our lives a lot easier in terms of explaining what we do, because now we have these examples from other domains, right? So now I can explain it very succinctly. Had we spoken 3 years ago, it would have been a very, very onerous scientific discussion in terms of how we do things. But now we have this great sort of example, and so it's made our lives easier in terms of explaining what we do, and also the go-to-market in terms of how we market and position this as a platform for chemists to use. That said, you see the sort of resulting sort of backlash as well as everyone starts, putting on their tinfoil hats or running in generative AI with their pitchforks and torches. And some of it is, some of the concerns are valid, right? And certainly there are things that we need to do in order to ensure that generative AI in the digital domains, whether it relates to text, whether it relates to images and now video, and all of these things are carefully safeguarded for the benefit of society. Yet at the same time, we're applying generative AI in a completely different domain. And the only thing I would say is, like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Certainly there are concerns around privacy, around biased models in terms of generating samples that are biased towards certain demographic groups or whatnot. But when it comes to drug discovery, we really are not subject to the same issues, and we're trying to cure cancer. So you can have both, as long as we're responsible and have a bit more of a nuanced understanding of what generative AI is. It's not all bad. It's like the internet is all kiddie porn, and therefore we need to block it. That's not true. And not all generative AI is going to be the end of days or cause massive geopolitical instability. There are use cases of generative AI that have a very, very strong value proposition for society that are not subject to the same restrictions because they're completely different.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was something I was wondering as well, because AI is like a new phenomenon for a lot of people. And so I was kind of wondering, what are some misconceptions that people might have about it who aren't super familiar?
Well, one of the primary misconceptions, and I think which contributes to the sort of the doom and the gloom, is that it's intelligent. Like, ChatGPT can actually think and it can actually reason. It can't. it very simply has no concept of what words mean. It's just learning from language. And so if you think of language as sort of a string of concepts that are represented by language, by words, right, in these units, and then the relationship between these words, entails some kind of structure. And if you can learn what the structure is, and you can learn, how to use a word here and there, absent of any understanding of what it means, you can come up with a pretty good chatbot. You can come up with a pretty good, LLM that can help you write a paper, that can help you write a normal document, that can help do things. And the fact that it can do things extraordinarily well is amazing. But at the same time, we shouldn't impute actual intelligence to an LLM because it really doesn't know, right? We don't even know what an actual word means necessarily when we use them. We use words that we don't know what they mean all the time, but just within this sort of string, we know what it means, so we're comfortable using it. So, this concept of people, oh, it hallucinates, it does all this stuff. Well, yeah, because it's not supposed to understand meaning. And when you try and make it do something that it's not, doesn't really know, it's like going to a cocktail party and meeting that, that one person, and there's always one at the party that holds off on and pretends to know way more than they actually do. We used to call it BSing. Now in generative AI, we call it hallucination. But it's largely the same thing. You ask, it's like, okay, this is what I think, right? But I think then to say that it's intelligent and it's going to replace us, is, I think, a very, very big leap. There are going to be certain tasks that are automatable, that are low value, that it will be able to make a strong impact in. But then eventually, it's just like the internet. We've seen this movie before. You just replace AI with the internet, and we saw this like 25 years ago, right? Yeah. In 5 years, we're not going to be talking about AI because everyone's going to be using it. And so we'll say, oh, whatever happened to AI? Well, we're using it all the time, right? So.
That's interesting. Cool. So do you have any sort of funny or interesting stories then about times AI has gone off the rails or anything that has surprised you?
Well, I mean, I don't think I need to add any more to, it's hard. First of all, I would like to say that, doing AI, like the development of algorithms and models, is extraordinarily difficult. It's a science, right? Not unlike physics or biology or chemistry, right? And just as these sciences are imperfect in their understandings of nature, right? By definition, science is just a snapshot in time of our understanding of nature and natural phenomena. And, our theoretical frameworks change each time we have more data. Machine learning and AI is the same thing, right? It continuously changes. The one thing I would say, though, is that the pace of innovation and advancement in AI, that's the thing that sets it apart from any of the other sciences. It just, deterministically will get better and better and better, right? So, a lot of the things people kind of look at this and go, aha, look at, stupid ChatGPT thinks that, this is that, and, it came out with this crappy thing. Okay, yes, it's not perfect, but you know what? In a year and a half, it's going to get better. And then in a year and a half, it's going to get better again and again and again. And then soon, there's not really going to be much to laugh at, other than, the way we laugh at certain people for making stupid remarks, right? So, I mean, I think that's the thing, is that it's still very early days. It's still maybe not even the first inning. It's the top of the first. And there's a long way to go. But the good thing is because of Moore's law, because of all of these sort of inexorable increases in technology, machine learning just gets better.
And what is Moore's law, sorry, for people who might not know?
I'm sorry?
Moore's law?
Yeah, Moore's law is it states that computer chips get twice as powerful and half the cost every year and a half. And so that's been the case since, I think, like 1959. So it was coined by Gordon Moore, who was one of the co-founders of Intel. And so far, what we've seen is exactly that. If anyone remembers, back we used to have these things called, like large sort of disk arrays, and you'd have this and you go like, oh my goodness, like 1 gigabyte. What would I ever do with this? The first iPhone or the first iPod, I think, had like, 200 megs or 200 gigs, and it was just crazy. Like, what are you going to do with all that memory? Well, we figured out uses for it. Now your iPhone, if it comes with less than 256 gig, that's a low end thing, and your computers now have terabytes. It's so, and then the speed and the power of your chip inside your phone is far greater than anything than a supercomputer was 20 years ago, right? So that has all been driven by, by Moore's law. And machine learning is also driven by Moore's law, right? The more powerful they get, the better they get, the more data they can run, the more parameters they can run. And so we're just going to we're going to see continued inexorable, improvement.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I was also wondering as well, how can we encourage more public understanding and sort of education around AI for people who might make a bunch of assumptions about it? Or you think it'll
Well,
just naturally, people will just learn more as it becomes more integrated within society?
so there are two ways to look at that. One way is that we just need to get more literate about, computer stuff, and, instead of running away going, I don't understand computers.
Mhm.
Yeah, you don't need to understand computers. There's some basic sort of like concepts there, but also people should not be afraid of technology, or, I mean, to a certain extent, the public is afraid of change inherently, especially when it threatens their livelihoods, or when it threatens, the safety of their families, or the concept of truth, in amongst, state level players. These are all legitimate reasons to be afraid, but it's not just AI that's causing it. But AI can definitely, accelerate a degradation in a lot of the institutions that we have right now. But in order for us to do this as a democracy, and as an informed democracy, where we actually vote for people who enact the laws, right? We need to ensure that people understand that they don't just run away and go like, I don't understand this, blah, 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 to actually engage with it, because it's actually not that hard to understand the concepts around it and to build the guardrails. What I'm concerned about are people who have misconceptions, who are driving the agenda and the discussion from a policy and a regulation perspective, outside of the areas where it's necessary. I'm not saying it's one or the other, but we need a nuanced view. And in order to have a nuanced view, you have to have a basic understanding of it. The good thing is that AI has touched a lot of sort of imaginations, right? And so I'm shocked by the types of people who are engaging with me about AI, not at just a basic level, but are actually intellectually curious about it. I think more of that, please, right? Because it's a really, really cool time to be working in this area, and it's a very, very interesting time to build, the ability of society to adapt to the inevitable changes that AI is going to bring. But I could have said that about the internet, 25 years ago, right? So like, let's not be afraid of this. It's just.
Yeah, no, definitely. That totally makes sense. And so with that, I was kind of thinking, what role do you see AI playing in addressing global issues like climate change or response to a future pandemic? Or any
So I
sort of.
think, yeah. So I think if you divide sort of AI between sort of, digital, the digital world of, that exists, in bits and bytes, right? And in data, natively, right? So information, for example, content that is created through whatever medium, versus the world of atoms and molecules, right? They're very different, right? So when you talk about the impact of AI in climate change, the AI in sort of pandemic preparedness, there's one element of it, and we work in this area, is because we're trying to use AI to predict actual physical things. And that's really hard. And that's not the focus of AI right now, right? Because the low-hanging fruit for AI, because it's a computer system, it's driven by software, is to work with data that's already digitized. That's why you can train, this large language model on like basically every single, article ever published, because it exists, right, on the internet or in other areas. It's relatively easy to ingest it and then to train on it, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you're looking for, I want to find a new, vaccine for this, this pandemic, for this, for this virus that, or bacteria that hasn't been, identified yet, you have to do a lot of experimentation, because we haven't quite sampled digitally a lot of nature. And biology is massively complex. Chemistry is huge. Physics, we don't really understand except from, some simple and elegant equations, and we continuously push the boundaries. So our understanding of the natural world is limited. Therefore, the data that we collect about it, that's digitized, is also going to be limited, right? And as a result, our ability to push that forward is a lot harder than it is to, basically scrape the web of every single, recipe ever done, and then asking a generative AI to make me a bouillabaisse with miso, but, vegan, and, with a Catalonian flair. And it can do that. And it'll do it really well. But then trying to find this new thing because of the availability of the data. And that's one of the issues that we have with sciences as well, is, data kept in science when you're trying to generate a molecule or you're trying to find a new substance or material or vaccine. A lot of the work is done experimentally, and the data is this byproduct of trying to find this actual thing, right, that exists. And so the data there is sort of treated as like, once I've got the thing, who cares about the data, right? Whereas, in the digital world, the data always exists, right? And the data is there to learn on. So I think what we're starting to see and what we need more of is the ability for people in the natural and experimental sciences to embrace sort of the data aspect, right? And then, and it's largely a generational thing as well, right? So if you're younger and you're a scientist and an experimentalist, you by definition will use computational methods because you grew up using that. Whereas, if you're let's say more advanced in your years and you start out with pen and paper, then it becomes a bit of a bigger shift. But I think just demographically, generationally, we're seeing that. I remember when the internet came out, people had a very hard time if they, I remember watching a documentary about the graphic design industry, and they were all freaked out when, Adobe came out. Because, oh my God, we don't use hot press anymore, or this, that, we don't actually do things. And then they adapted. But largely it was a generational shift. And I think that we're starting to see a generational shift as well. So I'd say with young people, it'd be like, what's the big deal? It's AI. And, I had my son is in grade 9, and he was writing an essay. And I said, let's take a look at it. And so I read it, and I was like, did you get ChatGPT to write this? And he's like, no. And then I said, what does moribund mean? And he goes, I go, what? Why? Because you used it in the opening paragraph. He's like, okay, yeah, I use ChatGPT. And I said, what? Dude, you know what I do? This is insulting, right? Just come clean and don't use ChatGPT because you need to learn how to write an essay. And he said, well, why? We use calculators for arithmetic and math. It's a tool. Why can't I use ChatGPT? And I was like, give me a day to think about a reason why, and I'll come back to you. But, if you're a young person, you're going to avail yourself of all these tools and innovations that are available in order to do what you want to do better. And so, me stuck in sort of the old world, even though I work in AI, I'm still subject to my old sort of preconceived notions and biases. And that's one thing that I think generationally will just fall by the wayside.
Interesting. So how do you think you'd address that concern then of getting people to learn how to write, maybe not just using ChatGPT? Or do you think it'll just be naturally integrated?
Well, I mean, if you have kids now that are in elementary school and learning, math, and they don't memorize the times tables anymore. They don't do. It's a different way of figuring things out. For me, it was just like basically 2 times 2 is 4, 2, and it's just rote memorization. It's different now. Now, is it more effective or fast? No, not necessarily. But from a pedagogical perspective, it's a better way of doing it. So then maybe, like when was the last time you solved like a long division problem, like using pen and paper instead of like asking Siri or typing it out on your phone calculator? I mean, in the future, maybe we won't need to write, sort of low level content anymore. We'll just outsource it. So, I mean, we adapt and then we use good uses for it. But then also you need to be able to know what something good is, right? And there's this concept that if you can't make it, then you don't understand it, right? So I think that the concept has to be, you need to learn how to make it in order to be able to understand it, rather than you need to learn how to make it so that you can keep making it, right? So you learn how to write a good essay just because later on, then you can tell what a good essay is, right? Instead of having to write that good essay all the time.
Right. So that's a good point. So it's good for like taste and curation. And once you develop that skill, then you could use ChatGPT more effectively as opposed to just, not knowing whether or not it's good.
That's right. Because ChatGPT is not perfect. It's not 100% out of the box. You got to go in and change it, and you can ask it to iterate, accordingly. Right. But if you don't know what something good is, then, you can't tell it to make something good. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Cool. So a few more questions. We're wondering what advice you'd give young professionals looking to enter the AI field who are coming up in college or recently graduated, if you had any advice for that.
So, I mean, I think that there are certain professions and industries that'll be more impacted in the short term versus the long term with generative AI. And I wouldn't say that, run for the hills and go, open a spa in Bali or anything like that, although that sounds pretty awesome to me. But I think the main thing is people who say, oh my God, my job is going to get, taken away by an AI. No, it's not. It's going to be taken away by people who use the AI, right? So, you know, get early on that adoption curve, right? Because industry and society as a whole will take years to adopt. So change management and the actual use of these cutting edge technologies, that takes the time, right? I mean, for crying out loud, healthcare professionals are still using fax machines, right? The federal government can't pay payroll because it's got a really bad payroll system. These are not technological issues. These are, these are issues with change management and how institutions implement it. With AI right now, there's a lot of technology that's there that you can use. And so it's not a technology issue. It's like when will a large bank or an insurance company start actually adopting, these technologies? And if you look at the internet, it takes a long time, right? It takes, some institutions still have not fully embraced the internet, even though it's 2024, right?
Yeah.
So, there's going to be a long tail sort of adoption. Therefore, if you can get ahead of that curve and learn how to use AI in the profession of your choosing, right? That's going to give you a massive advantage versus people who don't. And that's the thing that I think you need to focus on, is to find out. You don't need to know how to do, like gradient descent, and you don't need to know how to do like logistic regression or anything like that. If you want to, that's great, by all means. But, being a lawyer and learning how to use some of these tools, or being, someone in a profession, a content creator, and then learning how to do these things, I mean, that's going to set you apart. And if you don't, that's going to be table stakes in a few years. And so if you want to remain competitive, then whatever profession or industry that you've chosen, start adopting the AI now, such that when you start entering the job market and start using it, you're going to be ahead of the curve, and definitely ahead of your manager or your director, because adoption happens sort of like age young first and then up. So that would be my advice.
Great. That sounds good. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. We're wondering if there's anything else you'd like to add before we sign off. Great. Well, that sounds good. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of today's discussion on AI. I'd like to thank Handel for coming on. Your perspective has shed a lot of light on a compelling and increasingly important topic and how it applies to our day-to-day lives. This segment was brought to you by the Rising Economy 2024 conference, hosted by South Island Prosperity Partnership. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, RBC, and Catalyst sponsor, Van City. While in-person tickets are sold out for this event, complimentary tickets for the virtual day on March 8th are still available. Go to ourrisingeconomy.com for more details and a recording of this conversation. Thank you and goodbye.